Frank looks like the prophet from Olympus mountain in Greece, with the white beard framed against the mountain high with the clouds and the blue. Enrique also chooses a background that's very impressive. I'm going to have to choose a better background. I don't want to be outshined by everybody in the Sangha but me. How do I start? I used to start by saying, I love you all, which is true. But love is not enough to gain freedom. Recently, I've been talking a lot about using progressive relaxation to release you from deep tendencies and beliefs that hold you back from recognizing what the self is. And it came to me that this idea of progressive relaxation, whenever you spot something feeling-wise that's wrong inside of you, and by wrong, I mean a tension or something that distracts you, distracts your attention, and needs to be obliterated in order to get into the full relaxation of the natural self or the zero state. And yesterday it came to me that this is very similar to the Sedona release technique. Probably many of you are aware of this. They're quite identical. The release technique goes something like this. Something is bothering you. Maybe it's your desire for money, and you feel it preoccupies your attention. So you ask yourself the question, are you willing to let go of this preoccupation with money? The answer is either yes or no, or maybe. The next question you ask yourself is, can you let go of this obsession with money? If so, when? Tomorrow afternoon at 5? Sometime in the future? Or now? And if you're willing to let go now, you can often feel it like that sin is draining out of you, like it flushes out through you, like a bowel movement. the psychic bowel movement. So the step is recognition of what it is, that thing in you that distracts you from your practice. Can you let go of it? Will you let go of it? If so, when? 3 steps. It's like a very focused relaxation technique. On the other hand, the relaxation technique that I talk about is one I've practiced a long time because of my ability to feel muscular tension inside myself and not being able to relax it just by recognizing it. And instead, I practice how to let go of it just by progressive relaxation. To feel the muscle tension, like between my shoulders and in my trapezoids. And just relaxing them. It's hard work because generally they don't relax. But inside of you, you know how it would feel if they were relaxed. And if they were relaxed, you'd no longer be distracted by the tension there and would be more able to rest into yourself. And not the higher self that Mark talks about, but the lowest self in you. The self beneath thought, beneath activity. A self so deep inside of you that all the other states are added to it. And it takes you a lifetime to distinguish between those distracting states that have been added on through thought, desires, ambitions, etc., and have distracted you from your own true nature as a living being. You have a self. It's not something abstract like you first think about when you get in spirituality and hear about self-realization. It's not some sort of Ishvara or elevated state of bliss and happiness that comes with transcending the world. Instead, it's the self you had as a baby, where you're just laying in your crib, as loose as a goose, so to speak. Just looking up, seeing the ceiling, looking around and seeing your crib, the bars in it, feeling your body. Maybe you feel the wetness of having peed into your pants, your diaper. the warmth of it, and then it gets cold, and how when it gets cold, it disturbs you. So you start crying because it bothers you and you want relief from it. You know, maybe if you cry long enough, somebody will come and change your diaper or get rid of the cold at least. It's this kind of self you look for. The very basic self at the bottom of the life force, where you and the life force are identical. There's no higher here. There's only before. Before all thoughts. Before all adult desires. Before all adult ambitions, including that of getting enlightened. Enlightenment and the search for enlightenment is something mental. It's a desire because you picture some state that will set you free from something that's wrong or disturbing in your world, in the everyday life. Perhaps the blandness of existence. Or the pain of loneliness or depression. Or from relentless anger that grips you from time to time because of the state of the world or your relationships. Perhaps you feel lonely because of lack of a companion. Or you're angry because of something that's happening to someone you love. But what if you can get before all of that? Into that baby state of pure perception of the body, and any dis-ease within the body, such as cold, wet pee, or a diaper full of shit, or pain in the gallbladder, or feeling cold so that you're shivering, or feeling so hot because you feel overwhelmed and sweating. These things that strike the body and take away from the grace of being. How do we stop this ease within us? One way is just to relax into it and let that cold pee feeling that disturbs you, let that disturbance go. Or if it's pain in your gallbladder, let the pain be there and feel it fully without trying to escape it. So overall, you surrender to the disturbance and not fight to get rid of it. The release technique would be to feel the pain in the gallbladder and ask you, can you let go of it as an obsession And will you let go of it? If so, when? It's purely a conscious technique for releasing yourself from being grasped and distracted by something in you that distracts you from peace. Other distractions are more common is an obsession with control, for example, of your companion, to be the dominant person. And not really submit to the other person's needs and desires to make them feel better. Can you let go of control? Will you, Ian, let go of control? Will you, Vasilina, let go of control? If so, when? Next year?
After
Next
5 minutes.
What?
After 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. If so, when? When you can say now and be truthful, you're on the verge of getting rid of it. Unfortunately, I know those people that practice the release technique. And they're a mess. Because most of them use the release technique to get rid of obstacles that prevent them from getting and obtaining their really deepest desire, whatever that is. There's one woman who is an author about books about angels, who has the most crusty personality I've ever met in a human being. She's one of the stars of the release technique. She's notorious among the release technique people as being sort of an example of what can be accomplished, but at the same time, how one can be a failure using the release technique. And those in the Sedona release technique circle have been fighting over their teacher's teachings and property ever since he died, way before they acquired Robert as their replacement. They recruited Robert to be a replacement for their teacher up in Sedona. And unfortunately, I was one of the people that encouraged him to move to Sedona because I wanted to go there myself. But when I tried going there, I always got violently sick when I would try to go up there with Robert and Robert there. Except for once after he had gone up there for a year and a half. So Robert went up there. And his wife, Nicole, told me, that all of these people that practice the release technique and were vying for him to come and promising him all kinds of things, when he actually got up there, they reneged on every promise that they made to him to support him, to take care of him and Nicole. And their true nature came out, which was a smiling face that turned into a snarl after they got what they wanted. Later, when I tried to go up there, the last thing they wanted to do was to have me to come up to Sedona, because I had been Robert's number one person in Los Angeles, and they didn't want to lose their place as his number one and most important group up in Sedona. So the release technique was often used as a technique to get what they really wanted by getting rid of what they considered to be obstacles to their getting what they really wanted. Now, their teacher said to use the release technique to get rid of everything so they can get self-realization. But although they may have thought that that's what they were doing, in fact, they used the release technique to get rid of obstacles from them attaining something they wanted as a human being for their own self, like to be the world's leading author of books on angels and making a tremendous amount of money doing it. The release technique, although useful, is of no value to self-realization if you use it to get rid of obstacles that prevent you from getting what you really want, if what you really want isn't self-realization. You can say to yourself, yeah, I'm using it to get self-realization, but in fact, you're using it to get rid of obstacles in everyday life, obstacles that prevent you from getting something else. I guess progressive relaxation too can be a failure if you're not doing it without the intent to relax into the deepest part of yourself. Some call it the natural self. Some, like me, call it the zero state. Some call it becoming like a baby. You get what I mean. It's getting to the pre-adult Mark, or the pre-adult Bernadette, or the pre-adult James, filled with ideas and concepts and desires and hopes. You see, you can have self-realization experiences. You can have God realization experiences. You can have all kinds of great spiritual experiences. But until you get rid of all those add-on desires, that distract you from just becoming yourself, you won't be able to stay in your realization. You'll always be thinking about something else. How do I have a great enlightenment experience that transforms me totally? That single experience that blows me to hell and leaves me totally enlightened, that blows away the clouds of ignorance and of this desire. And it doesn't happen. What we have are individual awakening experiences to certain aspects of the divine, whether it's God realization, like I had 12 years ago, or realization of the zero state, which I had with Robert when I became nothing and watched the various states of consciousness come to me. And Robert said, I was enlightened at that point because that was his state. He watched waking and sleep and dreams come to him, and he was not of them. They were stranger visitor states that came to him, the host of his own consciousness. And that host was not affected by the passage of the various states of consciousness. But he remained there. I didn't. I recognized it as a step. That consciousness and sleep awareness and dream awareness were not me. I was the observer of them, the experiencer of them, the witness of them. And to me, it became a conviction. But it's not a place I was there all the time. There were still things in me that prevented me from resting in myself. And there are probably many other things still in me that prevent me from obtaining the perfection of some yet unknown state. But it's not an elevated state, Mark. It's not something transcendent and beyond you. It's you in the deepest, primordial, unblemished self before becoming an adult, before all of the adult desires and experiences, and just resting in the deepest part of ourselves. And in that deep rest, one can find complete peace, incredible states of bliss, that become progressively refined, so much so that the subtlest states of bliss are almost unrecognizable unless you've experienced them, deep different states of bliss over the years. Because everything becomes more refined as it disappears into the deepest layers of one's own self. And there one finds complete peace and the barest sort of awareness of the life force within you. Now, the discovery of the life force, for me, was the most profound transformative experience of all of them that I've had. The second most profound was that with Robert. When I looked inside of myself and found there was no self to be found, that there was just emptiness there. There's no one there to watch over the store, so to speak, and brought a kind of period of terror and fear because no one was looking after me. There was no central agency that was in charge of my life. There was no entity there. It was just emptiness. One can say emptiness was living my life. And then I saw that the various states of consciousness came to me too, and I was separate from those states of consciousness. That the entire experience of being born and being a human being was added onto me. As the watcher of spirit. And later on, realizing in an abstract way that that watcher of spirit was the same in all life forms, all sentient beings everywhere, not just human beings, but cows and cats and dogs and trees. We are all witness. We are all observer and feeler and hearer and taster and toucher. There's only one. There's only one subject, one universal subject, and trillions of objective entities. Spirituality then becomes merging in the subject, the universal subject of the universal self. But when that's felt in the person, it becomes an instantiation of the universal self within our own body mind. And it's like falling into the watery, dark depths of our own true self, our own deepest self. Where we sink into that darkness within, still seeing the light of consciousness illumining that darkness, and just relaxing there in that basic touch of beingness within us. And then finding there's nothing to do, nowhere to go. I'm perfect like I am. I'm rested in myself. It's a lot like what happened in the book Siddhartha, where Siddhartha practices the Buddha path, goes to many teachers, tries millions of techniques, until finally he rests in his ordinary self. And becomes a ferryman, ferrying travelers across the river to the other side. In other words, he becomes a teacher, symbolically aiding travelers on the way. In complete peace and harmony. Or the story of the monk confronted by the invading general of these armies, maybe the Mongol armies, who ignores the general when he comes into the temple. And the general gets furious. Says, "Why don't you recognize me? Don't you know who I am? I am he who can run you through without a second thought." And the monk says, "Can you recognize me? I am he who could be run through without a second thought." This person wants nothing. Even clinging to life is abhorrent to him. He just lives life from day to day, carrying water, chopping wood, and all that kind of stuff. He can live in the mundane world and function there. Because he has rest in his deepest self. That deepest self, which is the self of all things everywhere. All life forms. Or he himself is identical to the life force and knows the life force intimately as it trickles through his personality and his sense of being alive. He knows himself as the life force, and he's aware of himself. He's conscious of being the life force. And he still worships himself as the life force inside of himself. But he does not cling. He does not cling even to himself. He just lives unhindered, free from all diversions and distractions. For he has become the self of all. He loves the self of all. So you can use the release technique. It's a very useful kind of thing to do if there's something particularly that's bothering you. Like your lover being 8,000 miles away and you're pining for him. Or that lover who is pining to make money so that he can come back, or whatever. You can let go of all of those hindrances and feel what the freedom is like of not having an obsession, not having a desire for change or grasping at some state. Peace. Or as Robert kept saying on his deathbed, freedom. Freedom. Freedom from desire. Freedom from the need to possess. Freedom from the fear of death. Freedom. And that is life. Without doubt, without fear, without grasping for something outside of one's own existence, and even willing to let go of that. For you are, in effect, Parabrahman, the observer of all. And the life may end in one individual, but it remains in trillions of others across the universe. You no longer identify with the body James, or the body Jay, or the body Vasily, or the body Chris. You're the observer of all of those. You realize, Frank, that no matter how big the experience of enlightenment you have, it's of no use if you desire more. You desire a certain kind of experience, one that hasn't happened to you yet. Or if you think of the ultimate state as being an absorption in love, and you haven't obtained that, you're not a failure. As long as you cling only to your own self to be true, your own experience of who you are while you're laying in bed in the morning, not feeling a desire to do anything or to think anything or to recognize anything, but just being without a suit of armor or without an exercise uniform on, saying you should exercise 30 minutes a day. You should eat this and not eat that in order to preserve your body for another few years. No shoulds. Live without shoulds. Some say if you live without shoulds, you don't have a moral compass to guide you. That's a Christian way of thinking. They want to stick you into a system of morality, the 10 Commandments, and all of that, loving God, all these kinds of ideas, just as all religious systems try to fit you into their rubric. And most of us have been able to give up that in order to try to find our true self and what we truly are. But we're so confused by the thousands and thousands of terms of spiritual seeking and spiritual attainment that we don't know our own true self. We can only get there by forgetting everything, forgetting all obligations, forgetting all aspirations. Just let go of all of that stuff, all of those desires, all of those ideas, and become like a baby, resting in your own self, in your own pee, your own poo. And not worried about how that makes you feel. You can feel upset lying in your own pee and poo. But instead of crying to make it right, relax and let it be there. Ramana sat for 18 years in the temple basement, being bitten to death by insects, having wounds filled with pus that stuck him to the floor, because he was in the ultimate bliss of resting in consciousness, his own true self. Can you even imagine that being the case? Can you imagine being uncomfortable in your own pee and poo? Your own stomach aches? Just not let it faze you, because you're resting in yourself. You're resting in yourself. And thus ends the lecture about the similarity of the release technique with Advaita and the progressive relaxation technique that Musica has been obsessing about for the last few months. And hopefully he'll let go of now. I love you all. Now, are there any questions or insults, complaints? Do you want to argue with me about higher or lower, Mark?
Okay, well, since you invited me, yeah, lately my sense of beingness has become more refined, as you say, just through ongoing practice. I'm doing it a long time, and as it's becoming more refined, at times the feeling is becoming more subtle. You talked about, I used to have very dramatic experiences. I do sometimes, but that's interesting. So my sense of beingness is capable of being more subtle now. And with the increased subtlety, it's more consistent, it's more stable, it's more ongoing. And I remembered a few weeks ago, you talked about subtle feeling of bliss, but within that subtle bliss is an exquisiteness. And I experienced the same thing, although it's subtle and profound at the same time, because as I focus on it, it kind of magnifies and becomes more vivid, and it becomes deeper. And within that subtlety, there's a profundity as well. And I look at it this way: when the whole thing about awakening is abiding in what you really are, as opposed to the things added onto you. And the things added onto you are so convincingly you that it's a very tough thing. But once you see that you can sink below it and that you can just be the bigger picture without, so yeah, more refined, more steady state, more sustainable. And there's like there's often physical feeling of bliss entering into my energy field, into my body, especially through certain points of my body, but overall it's happening. So that's what's going on with me. Everything is happening just like it should. And the sense of beingness, it's like this voice that's saying, oh, Mark, we're so glad to see you again. Please come deeper into us. It's like, it invites me. I have a relationship with it. So that's what's happening.
Edgy, I just want to say thank you. There's so much love here, always. Sometimes I don't always feel it, but today there is so much bliss. And I've been spending time with the desert, and it's been so conducive to stillness and silence. And maybe to some extent I needed to do that, to just rest in the silence, but it can't touch this bliss. It has nothing on this love. This love seems to contain all of that. It seems to have the emptiness and the silence in it. And there's another quality there that makes it something else. And I don't know what it is, but it's magical. It's beautiful. And it's so apparent today, for whatever reason. The desert was wonderful, but I couldn't always feel into the heart. It's very interesting.
Did you say desert?
Desert. Yeah, I've been roaming around the desert. I've been a desert dweller the last month. I was in the Mojave and
Try it in July.
no, thank you.
I found it equally peaceful when I was in the desert near Tucson until June rolled around. It was 114 in the shade.
No, I would roast. I'm from Chicago originally, and it's humid heat, but we don't get 100. We don't get those temperatures. Yeah, but it was nice, and of course, the scenery was beautiful. Just the giant cactus. Oh my gosh. The stars, the spaciousness, the emptiness. But it doesn't touch
The
this
stars
love.
are amazing in the desert at night.
Yeah.
It's
But
like a endless space that you get lost in.
yeah.
It's like the internal emptiness that you find through self-exploration is reflected by that view of the infinite space above, with that starry sky so brilliantly shown, which you never see in the city.
I've never seen stars like I've seen in the desert. It's been amazing. But now it's stars and satellites. So it's like, oh, what's that thing moving? Oh, it's another satellite. But Edgy, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
You're most welcome. You're most welcome.
Thanks everyone here. Everyone contributes. Everyone is a presence. Be presence. Thank you all.
Maxie, isn't it about time you came back and you resolved whatever grievance you have with me and come back to our Sangha? And Frank, pay attention to where you are now, not where you think you should be. You've had 30 years on the path, serving. Don't you think that's enough? Let go. You've done it all. You've been like Milarepa, building one cabin of stone after another and then having it destroyed. "30 years serving. And it's enough for anybody."
I've been in Milarepa's cave, had my hands in the ceiling where he lifted the rock wall. The image that I used to work with all the time was the image of Sisyphus. I'd had a teacher once who gave me when we finished our work together, he gave me that statue and said, keep it until you can pass it on. Few things of late, not the least of which, of course, is what you've been talking about. In meditation, I think I mentioned last week that there have been brief glimpses, flashes of light. And in this past week, they've not been flashes, but they've been sustained. And there's two things that come with that. One is a place, the individual that says, wow, look at that. And the simultaneous realization that it's just another phenomenon, and not to get caught in it as being anything more or less than it is. This also seems to be a time in this life when body stuff is coming up large. Has to do with aging in the body, of course, and discovering that there are cataracts that need to be removed and a little skin cancer that needs to be removed, and on and on and on. And with that has come both the acceptance of all that without concern and moments of the body identified fears coming up. And I was up all night with it last night. Not all night, but it ran the dream world for me. And so I'm just watching it, aware of it. I think the biggest obstacle that remains is the one you just spoke to, which is thinking that there should be something other than there is. There's nothing new about that, but it has less and less of a hold on me. And most of the time I am in a state of almost endless peace, while all this other stuff just goes on. Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome. Yes. Do you have anything to say? You just came to visit. She's one of my most advanced teachers. Radha. Who is Radha, the wife of? Indra?
Krishna's girlfriend.
Thank you.
And said to be the divine mother, the nature.
Now, you can see this. Can you see that picture of Kali and me? I was taken just days before she died. Kali's death left me feeling very empty. And soon thereafter, Max died. No, Max died before she. And then after Kali, Fred died. And our house has seemed like a crypt since then in comparison. They were so lively and abundant of life force. And their absence is sorely missed. So Radha is gaining all of our attention that we gave to them. And she's changed. She no longer fears Eddie so much as she did. She knocks him around at times to put him in his place. But I miss Kali. Anybody else have a remark?
I'm so grateful that I'm here, and every time I'm here, you say exactly what I need to hear. And I think the thing that you said about just be aware of what you feel now as opposed to what you think you should feel. And it's just that simple, to be in the now moment. I mean, I might get it wrong for the rest of this incarnation, but I think that every time from each satsang, I feel less inadequacy in the sense of trying to deal with the mundane world. I get sucked into stuff and then I just have to let it go, because a lot of it is just so poisonous and anathema to human life that it isn't even, you can't spend any time with it. I just have to put it down. I mean, my family lives in the world and they're still in business, and I couldn't go into the absolute and, you know, like look at consciousness and be in grace and bliss, because there's parts of mundanity that are still part of my purview, and I need to live in that. And I love it more because of everything that you share with me, Edgy. And that's why I love the satsangs, because as I said, and I'll say it again, they always feel like Shakti Pat sadhanas. There's always something that you do to me that I just love. And I like, for a moment when you said that about feel what you feel now, it just almost everything went down into my heart. And that's the filament falls away. And if that happens, then at that moment, I mean, something changes, if anything changes, if nothing changes, but something changes. And I come closer, if there is any coming closer, which there isn't. But the immediacy of the joy and the bliss of it always gets deeper. And I love you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Jay.
Hey, Ed. It's Michael T.
Oh, yes.
All right. See, obviously, in life, it's there's a bifurcation of the mundane and the spiritual. And is there a requirement to somewhat maximize, I mean, experience the mundane to the fullest extent? I mean, you see a lot of people before they pass away talk about how they didn't experience this and that. But can you actually have a marriage of a spiritual life and a mundane life? I mean, be the best boxer, be the best hedge fund trader, et cetera, or is that bound to just fall wayside and become just disastrous?
Well, the discovery of the divine in oneself. When you have that experience of recognizing the life force itself as something in you, almost like an entity, that's what I call living the life divine, because you're no longer an ordinary human. You don't regard yourself as a human, and everything that was human is merely mundane. It's like the life force in you is God in you. And in a way, you always worship that God in you as something separate and special, as well as yourself, and it becomes the self too. But from the outsider's point of view, you're living completely a mundane life. But inside, that's all gone. All that there is the divine in you. And you're only aware really of that. You can't take your eyes off of that, your mind off of that, your feeling off of that is the life force in you and the consciousness that is witnessing the life force. You become grabbed and enamored of God in you, which is your own self. So yes, you continue to live in the mundane life in the sense that anybody else that hasn't obtained liberation sees you as living a mundane life, but you do not. For you, you live in God. You live in that life divine, life force. It's your constant companion. It elevates you out of the ditches of the mundane world. And you're never the same. Even in the worst state that you perceive in the future, like having lost the divine, you haven't really lost it. You're just in a different, drier period of being in the divine. But the life force is always there. You're always aware of it, like an entity inside of you. Like I said, when the first time, it was like realizing the Christian God inside of me sitting on a throne. And then it just became the worshipful God. And now it's like a puppy. It's like a puppy I play with and idolize because my puppy is so great and so wonderful. And he titillates me. It makes me happy. Okay. It's time for me to go and to end this particular lesson.